Sixth bhava prajna is one of the more important prajnas that you'll do, because one of the things it has to do with is disease. And the other indication that Tajika Nilakanta gives in respect to the sixth bhava is about getting a new job somewhere, like getting a better, new service-centered job, where you're the person who's serving another or working for somebody else. So it also answers that. But the majority of what Tajika Nilakanta talks about is disease. Now, interesting enough, under sixth bhava prajna, when he gives the diseases, he doesn't deal with the sixth bhava very much. In fact, there's only one indication that he talks about for the sixth bhava, and that in respect to a person of whether the person is sick, if the Lagna Lord or moon's in Ithisala with the sixth Lord, or if the Lagna Lord or the moon's combust, then the person actually is sick. So sometimes some people are wondering if there's something wrong with them, but they're not sure. That Ithisala or combustion would indicate yes, they're sick. You can also use your general prajna rules for that, meaning you would, if the Lagna Lord's in the sixth and the sixth Lord's in the Lagna, or if the Lagna Lord aspects the Lagna within orb and the sixth Lord aspects the sixth house within orb. Those general yeses when we turned about at the very beginning of this course. You want to apply those as well. But, so for that question, is a person sick, we want to look at the sixth house. But for the majority of the prajna, and for many prajnas you'll notice, Tajika Nilakanta focuses on the angles. So that's what we're going to focus on the most of the time. In prajna, angles are very, very important. So diseases. In respect to diseases in which the healer asks about the patient, or the caretaker, or the parent, the person who's taking care of them asks about the patient, then in that case, the Lagna is the healer, or the person that's asking about the person. The seventh is the disease. The 10th is the sick person, and the 4th is the remedy. That's the formula Tajika Nilakanta gives. He says, if somebody, and when it comes to disease, the Lagna is the healer, the 7th is the disease, the 10th is the sick person, and the 4th is the remedy. Okay? The reason he says that is because it would be typical for healers to inquire of astrologers of the well-being of their patients, if they had any fear or worries that they were going to make it. Okay? However, most of the time, and today, the sick person themselves is going to go to the astrologer. I've never had this, I won't say never, but I don't regularly get doctors ask me about their patients. Okay? For all I know, that might be illegal for them to do that with that client, doctor confidentiality they have. But sometimes a healer will do that. But most of the time, the person themselves who's sick is asking. In that case, the Lagna is the querist or the sick person. The basic rule is the Lagna descendant is always the person who's coming to the astrologer about the question. Okay? The 7th is the disease, but now the 10th is the healer, and the 4th is the remedy. So the Lagna and 10th swap places. Okay? So you have to make some slight differences if depending on who's asking the question. The person taking care of the sick person, or the sick person themselves, in which case use the Lagna. So, if the person who's taking care of the sick person, whether it's a parent, a partner, a doctor, the healer, then the Lagna is the healer, or the person coming to you. The 7th is the disease, the 10th is the sick person, and the 4th is the remedy. In that regards, krura affliction, or conjunction that the Lagna, indicates that the healer will not be able to heal the patient. Rather, they only make the disease worse. Or the partner will only, say the partner is, or the parent is trying to help them. No, they're not going to be able to help, which means they're not going to find the right doctors. If anything they find will just make them worse. So it means basically the person who's asking about the patient is not going to make the person better. In fact, they're only going to make the person worse. Okay? Now, if there's cruel planets in the 10th, it indicates that the treatment will not work on account of the patient. So that means while the doctor might be saying the right thing, the patient will somehow be messing it up. The patient might not be working with the doctor. The patient might not take their medicine. Their patient might not believe it. The patient might just be harboring a lot of bitter thoughts and really doesn't want to get well deep down inside. Something that is the patient's fault that they're not getting better. And therefore, the patient's fault that they're going to get worse, because that malefic there will indicate things will get worse. Now, in the event that it's the patient that comes to you, the sick person comes to you, then the lagna is the querist, who's the sixth person. The seventh is the disease, the 10th is the healer, and the 4th the remedy. Now, krura, affliction, conjunctions to the 10th indicates that the healer will not be able to heal the patient. Rather, they will only make the disease worse. So that means the doctor that person's going to, the healer they're going to, or the healer that they think they're going to go to, or, whatever, the advice they're going to take. And sometimes the advice they're going to take is simply some advice they find on the internet. So they might search on the internet and say, oh yeah, for this disease. At that point, the internet, and that is their doctor, okay? Or that person they found, or that web page they found is their doctor, okay? So it's the healer, it's the source they look towards who's going to help them heal. That's the 10th. Cruel planets there shows that source is not going to make them better. It's actually just going to make them worse. Then cruel grahas at the lagna indicate that the querent will not work. The treatment won't work because of the querent themselves. Because of the sick person, they themselves will do something that prevents them from getting better, or hold an attitude that prevents them from getting better. Okay? So those are your first basic steps. Now, for both cases, whether it's the helper, the healer, the doctor, the partner that asks about the sick person, or whether it's the sick person themselves, cruel planets at the 7th lead to complications. So that means the disease gets more complicated, it's more severe than they thought, it transmutes into something worse. It just gets really tricky. Krura grahas, cruel planets at the 4th, also lead to complications, usually due to incorrect remedy. Because again, the 4th house is the medicine. So malefics, cruel planets at the 4th, that means conjunct the 4th cusp in the sign of the 4th cusp Rashi, lead to complications because the treatment itself is bad for the person. It's throwing them off. It's the wrong medicine, it's the wrong diet, something that just drains and weakens them further usually. Now, gentle places at these places indicate recovery. And by places, I'm going to edit that, it means in the angles. Any of the angles, whether it's the lagna, the healer or the patient as the case may be, the 10th, who's the patient or the healer as the case may be, in the 7th, which is the disease, or if it's in the 4th, the remedy. Any gentle planets joining the signs of those angles indicate the person will recover. So the very basic part of doing the prajna for disease is you want benefics in the angles to get better, malefics in the angles make them get worse, and if the malefic's in the 1st, it's the patient's problem if they come to you. If it's in the 4th, it's the remedy's problem. If it's in the 10th, it's the doctor's problem. If it's in the 7th, it's just because the disease is a real monster. It's a very, very bad disease. If there's malefics in the 7th, that's just going to be really, really hard to overcome. The lagna lord, and oftentimes you'll get a mix. So you might get a benefic in the 1st, which shows the person's really working the treatment, trying to get better, is ready to get better, but they may have a malefic in the 7th, which means they have a monster of a disease that they're combating. Okay? Or they may have a benefic in the 7th, which shows the disease is not that serious or difficult to cure, but they might have a malefic in the 4th, so they're doing the wrong remedy and they're just not getting better, or it makes the recovery really, really slow. So if you see a mix, they're going to get better, it's just going to be a lot more time because something's not lining up, something's not right. Okay, or because the disease is just so hard because there's a malefic in the 7th. Then the lagna lord and the moon in Ithisala with Samya Grahas indicate overcoming the disease. Basically, if the lagna lord or the moon, if they're both there, that's best. But even if one of them are in Ithisala with a gentle planet, it indicates they're going to start feeling better in the future, because Ittasala yogas indicate future, benefics indicate gentleness and comfort, so they're going to start feeling better. But if the planets that are curing the disease, that means the gentle planet that's in Ittasala to the Lagna Lord or the moon, the gentle planet in the angles, if any of the planet, whatever the planet is that's curing disease, is retrograde, the disease is probably going to return after it's cured. So they'll get better, but then they'll come back and have to deal with it again. Okay? Now sometimes a person may not get better, and not getting better means they're just not going to get better in the next year. Because again, and they're not going to get better with their current doctor, or they're not going to get better with their current patient, with the current remedy, or they're not going to get better with the current attitude and effort they're making, depending on where the malefic is. If it's the patient that's asking and there's a malefic in the first, they're not going to get better because of their own attitude, their own fault. If it's in the 10th, they're not going to get better as long as they have that doctor. If it's in the 4th, they're just not going to get better as long as they have that, if they're trying that particular remedy that they're working on. And it basically means they're not going to get better likely in the next year, because Prashna, addresses about a year's worth of time. But that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to have the disease and die from it. Sometimes a person will have a disease and, it won't cure it, but they'll live with it the rest of their lives because it's not a disease that's going to kill them. It might wear their immune system, and so then they might get something down the road that kills them. But itself, it's not going to be the autopsy cause of death. Okay? But sometimes it will be. So you also need to look for any indications that there's going to be death due to the disease. Okay? Now, if the disease is showing to be that they're going to recover from it, then you don't really have to worry about them dying from it. Okay? But if there's problems with the disease is not showing to be cured, or it's not showing to be cured in any strong fashion, which means there might be some light, one benefic in angle, but then 3 malefics in the other angles, then that still is not a really curable disease. Okay? Because 3 malefics is going to cause a lot of trouble compared to 1 benefic in the angle. So at any time that the disease isn't obviously and fully cured, you want to start looking at the death due to the disease, combinations. Okay? This first one's really funny. The Lagna Lord in the 4th, in Ittasala to the moon, indicates death. Okay? Now, I would only consider that if there are strong indications that the disease will not be cured. Why this applies, the Lagna Lord in the moon and Lagna Lord in the 4th and Ittasala to the moon indicates death. The only reason I can think of, because death, burial is related to the 4th house, the ground, or you die and you're laid on the ground. Maybe they say this indicates death because you're going to be laid out on the ground. Your body, the Lagna, your body is going to be on the ground in the future when this happens, which would happen if you die. But only apply that yoga if you see a lot of trouble, if you see just everything lining up that they're not going to get better. Okay? Otherwise, you're going to be predicting death a lot more often than it happens. Then the 8th Lord in the Lagna indicates death when the moon or Lagna Lord's in the 8th. So 8th Lord in the Lagna and the moon or Lagna Lord in the 8th is a combination for death from the disease. The Lagna Lord with the sun and the moon, the Lagna Lord with the sun, let me put a comma here so it's a little easier to read. And the moon in Ittasala with the 7th Lord, which is in the 6th, indicates death. So you got your Lagna Lord with the sun, the moon's in Ittasala with the 7th Lord, and that 7th Lord's in the 6th indicates death. Now some translators translate this differently. They consider this either ors, meaning they'll say the Lagna Lord with the sun will cause death, the moon in Ittasala with the 7th Lord will cause death, and the 7th Lord in the 6th indicates death. But I read the sutra, it sounds like one statement to me. And I just don't think the Lagna Lord with the sun by itself is going to kill you, or that the moon in Ittasala with the 7th Lord itself is going to kill you. Of course, the moon in Ittasala with the 7th Lord is going to contribute to the disease having a grasp, because the 7th house is the disease, right? So you want to watch that 7th Lord and see what it's in Ithasala with, just to see if the disease is going to hang on tight, or what it's going to come on stronger, or if it's already come on strong in the past. So ideally, the 7th Lord is in separating yoga, in the Mushrifa yoga, with the Lagna Lord or the moon, which shows that the worst part of the disease is behind them. If the Lagna Lord or the moon is in Ithasala with the 7th Lord, it shows that the worst part of the disease is still on the horizon. Okay, which means they're going to get worse first before there's any chance of recovery. So these principles, each by themselves, are valid. The Lagna Lord with the sun contributes to the disease being more difficult. The moon in Ithasala with the 7th Lord, or the Lagna Lord in Ithasala with the 7th, indicates that the disease is going to get worse still. The worst is not behind them. If it's in separating yoga, then the worst is behind them, though. And the 7th Lord in the 6th, the 7th Lord is a disease. It's a disease. The 6th house is a state of struggling with your health. So the 7th Lord in the 6th is going to indicate the disease getting more difficult too. Okay? But I wouldn't predict death unless all of them were lined up. Unless, of course, there's no cure from the disease. If all the angles have malefics, which indicates no cure, and the Lagna Lord and the moon are not in Ithasala with any Samya Grahas, then in that case, if the moon's in Ithasala with the 7th, or even the Lagna Lord's in Ithasala with the 7th, the disease is going to come on stronger, and that could be death. Or the 7th Lord in the 6th could be death. Okay? But only if there's just no hope of recovering from the disease. The 8th Lord in bad dignity, or afflicted, or combust in an angle. So it has to be in bad dignity, afflicted, which means like joined by malefics, or in unfriendly aspects to malefics, or combust, and in an angle. So one of those and in an angle, while being in Ithasala with the Lagna Lord indicates death. So a prominent 8th Lord, which means it's in an angle, that's messed up because it's in bad dignity, afflicted by malefics or combust, and in Ithasala with the Lagna Lord, which means that troublesome 8th Lord is going to come your way, indicates death. Okay? So anytime you get a trashed 8th Lord in Ithasala with the Lagna Lord, you need to be concerned that death could happen. Okay? A good, healthy, strong 8th Lord, a good, healthy 8th Lord could help your longevity. Okay? So that can actually help you weather the disease. Okay, another combination. The Lagna or 8th Lord in an angle. In Ithasala with the Kruha Graha, that's in Padita, meaning Padita is overcome in planetary war. Okay, how do we see if a planet's in planetary war? Go to the chart, right-click on it, select Shadbala, go to Yudhabala. If any of these numbers under Yudhabala are not a 0, there's a planetary war in the chart. If the planet has a plus in front of the number, it won the planetary war. If it has a minus in front of the number, it's lost the planetary war, and it is therefore Padita or pressed, which is what they use for overcoming planetary war. And that indicates death. Okay? I'd also say that the Lagna or 8th Lords overcome in planetary war, and in Ithasala with the cruel planet would indicate death. So I'd say any of those in a Padita, a planetary war loss, would indicate death. Okay, as long as there's that Ithasala between the cruel planet and the Lagna or 8th Lord. So look for planetary war losers when it comes to disease. Then a cruel planet in an angle, overcoming the 8th Lord in war indicates death. Okay, so cruel planet that's in the 8th, and the 8th Lord is pressed by that, or overcoming war by that 8th Lord, or by that cruel planet, that's death. Then here's a real fun one. The Lagna Lord in the Dwadasamsha of the sun indicates death. Well, the Lagna is going to be in the Dwadasamsha of the sun in 1 out of 12 charts. And 1 out of 12 people are not going to die to come to you for medical readings. the ones that could die from that yoga are the ones that have malefics in the angles and who aren't going to get better from the disease. In that case, the Lagna Lord and the Dwadasamsha of the sun may indicate their death. Okay? But always before predicting death, as I mentioned, focus on, are they going to get better? Okay? Now, the Lagna and 8th Lords approaching each other indicates death. So that basically means the Lagna and 8th Lords in Ittasala indicate death. And I think that specifically means in respect to conjunction. Tajika is really unclear there. It just says approaching. Well, what's it mean when the Lagna and 8th Lords approaching? The best interpretation I found is that they're Ittasala and conjunct. Okay, so they're going to be at full conjunction at some point. But Ittasala, or Tajika Nilakanta just uses the word approaching. It's a little vague. The Lagna in a movable Rashi indicates that the disease wanes, but then the same ailment may return, unless there are indications to overcome the disease. So if a person has a dual sign, and if the disease is not indicating being cured, if the person has a movable sign, which is Aries, Cancer, Libra, or Capricorn, and if the disease is not shown to be cured, there could still be a change, which means they could feel better for a while, but then they get sick again. Or they may feel worse and then feel better. The disease will fluctuate, it'll change, which is the nature of movable signs. The Lagna in the dual Rashi indicates that the disease is other than thought. So that means there's a good chance they don't really know what the disease is. The thing they think it is perhaps maybe not what it really is. Okay? The Lagna in a fixed Rashi indicates that the disease continues to sicken the patient. So if the Lagna is a fixed sign, and if the disease is not going to get better, it's going to sicken them for a very long time, because fixed signs are hard to change. And even if the Lagna is a fixed sign, and it's showing, benefics are in angles, or there's some other combination showing they're going to get better, it's going to take them a lot longer to get better. Fixed signs make it longer to get better. Okay? Then the moon in Ittasala with the retrograde planet indicates a chronic disease. Okay? Then the moon in Ittasala, that's funny, huh? Okay, in Ittasala, with Saturn indicates that the disease started long ago due to some urinary obstruction. Okay, the moon's going to be in Ittasala yoga with a lot, quite often. And whenever you see that, it does indicate that the disease started long ago. But with the Saturn yoga, is the disease that started long ago going to necessarily be due to urinary obstruction? I really haven't found that to be true. But urinary obstruction, we have to kind of look at what that means. And what that means is there's some problem in your bladder. Your bladder's not releasing urinary obstruction, something of that sort. And that problems in the bladder begin due to just a worn immune system. The bladder's and the energy the bladder generates in the body has a lot to do for just maintaining your health. For maintaining your first line of immune defense. And when that first line of immune defense has been crossed, oftentimes there'll be some kind of urinary problem to indicate that the bladders have been taxed, okay? Now, of course, in Western medicine, the bladder is not considered that important. It's just kind of this thing that holds urine. But in the context of the energies of the body, the bladder is very, very important. It's an organ in the body that has an energetic effect on the body, as do all the organs through Eastern type medicine, or as explained in Eastern medicine. And in that, type of system, that energetic system, the energy of the bladder has a lot to do with your immune system first line of defense. So the moon in Ittasala with Saturn indicates the first line of defense was crossed long ago. And that the serious disease, once that first line of defense has been crossed, that's when the serious disease starts to brew. Okay? And so this shows that this disease has been crossed. that that first line of defense has been crossed, and that, the person hasn't been in a place to really fight it off successfully in a long time. Now, the funny thing about this sutra, he says the moon in Ittasala with Saturn. But of course, Ittasala with Saturn Ittasalas always indicate the future. I find this yoga working better when we use, Musharifa yoga, okay? I'm going to write that down here too, instead of just explaining it. Works better with I'm going to put separating. Okay? So if I see it's the moon separating from Saturn, then I say, yeah, you crossed that first line of defense a long time ago. Okay? That first line of defense has been worn down a long time ago. But if I see the moon in Ittasala with Saturn, I'm actually more inclined to say the first line of defense is going to be crossed in the future. And once that first line of defense gets crossed, then diseases just get a lot worse generally. Okay? So moon in Ittasala with Saturn, to me, looks like a disease that's going to get a lot worse in the future. And I don't know why he uses Ittasala yoga for this yoga, but it could just be over the ages that word, it's just a typo or a mistake or something of that sort, a miswriting. Because right in that same sutra, he also talks about, this points 19 and 20 are found in the same sutra. Yoga number 19 is the moon in Ittasala with the retrograde planet indicates a chronic disease. And that means a chronic disease that's going to be really hard to cure and last and last and last. Maybe because that yoga had that sutra in it, some scribe made a mistake, and in the second part of the sutra. So look for the moon in separation to Saturn too, to see, where they're at with respect to that disease. Okay. The one unusual combination that can help the person have some hope of getting better, that is if it's from the 7th day before until the 4th day after the Prashna. So for that basically 11-day period, if the moon or sun are joined or aspected by gentle planets, things can get better. So just kind of look at where the sun and moon have been the week before and the next 4 days to see if the energy in the sky is good for getting better. Basically, people get better when the moon and sun in the sky are joined and aspected by benefic planets. Okay? Well, if they're joined and aspected by benefic planets in the chart, there's a good chance they're going to be joined and aspected by benefics a few days before and a few days after. But if in the chart they're not joined and aspected by benefics, it's really not likely they're going to be joined or aspected by benefics a few days before or a few days after. Okay, unless they're very on the edge of a sign. Okay? All right, so there's a lot of good yogas for disease. The most important, though, is simply looking at those angles. That's the most important part of analyzing disease. Normally, you're not going to have to deal with the person dying, but that does happen sometimes. Okay, now for some examples. So here's a chart of a person who came because they'd had a seizure. Now, if we starting by looking at the 1st, 4th, 7th, and 10th, we see the first house, which is the patient, who is also the client, because the client was asking about their own disease. We see Mercury in the first house, which shows that, as a benefic, shows that they're going to try to make some effort to get better, and that Mercury can help them get better because of the things they do. Interesting enough, the 10th Lord Sun was in the first house, indicating that they want to take care of their own problem. And what happened to the person, they just had a seizure. They'd never had a seizure before, but they just had a seizure. And so, of course, they're a little freaked out about that. Okay? Now, Scorpio, as it turns out, is the sign of seizures. And so here we got the Lagna happens to be Scorpio. Okay? Now, the remedy, which is the 4th house, has the moon in it, which shows, and the moon is waxing. It's a waxing moon, so it's a benefic. So that lets us know that the remedy that the person is going to take is going to help them. Now, they're their own doctor because the 10th Lord's in the first. Okay? They decided just to deal with this themselves. They didn't want to go to the doctor. They didn't even have money to go really see a doctor and get checked out. But the moon in the fourth is showing the remedy that they decided to do is going to help them. And the remedy they decided to do was to rest, take it easy, which is the moon. To relax because they felt that they'd been overworking and stressed too much, and that they needed to take it easy, and that should help them get over whatever it was that caused the seizure to occur. And the moon being in the fourth shows that, yes, that's very, very likely. Okay? That will at least contribute to healing whatever it was that threw them off. Okay? The seventh house, which is the disease, has Saturn in it and Jupiter. Saturn, of course, is going to make the disease harder to get over. And this is the financial stresses they've been under, Saturn ruling the second house. Jupiter is also there and contributes to the disease. Well, one of the stresses they'd had was they'd had a child recently, so it also, not only have they been working really hard, they've also had to wake up more at nights and not been sleeping as well. So that just wore them out more. And again, so that's why they felt they needed just to take it easy, take some time off from work and rest, and then all would be well. That's what the moon was telling them. The good news is Jupiter's a benefic on an angle and will help them get better. Okay? The moon is in separating in Musharifa Yoga to Saturn. It's separating from Saturn, which means that the problem they had started because they pushed themselves too far. They crossed the line of their immune system, where their body's first line of defense was over. So they were in a very weak, vulnerable position, which is basically what that Saturn Moon Yoga represents, that a person's in a weak and vulnerable position. Okay? And then the benefic in the angle Jupiter, that's in the disease house, is retrograde, which lets us know why the moon and Mercury are going to help them get better, and why Jupiter is going to help them get better too. Eventually, they're going to have some return of that problem. Okay? Because one of the benefics is retrograde. But overall, with three benefics, Mercury, Moon, and Jupiter, in angles compared to two malefics, Saturn and Sun, they should get better. And they should feel better and not be able to have this problem. It's going to take some time, though, simply because the lagna is fixed. And that always means it takes a lot of time to get better. And sometimes that means a person can't change all their circumstances enough to make the remedy they use be as effective as possible. So while the remedy that was going to help was more rest, the moon, in the fourth, and the remedy that they'd chosen was going to be a good remedy, the remedy won't work as fast because the lagna is fixed, which shows that the person can't change everything to revolve around that. They weren't able to just go on a retreat for 2 months. They're not going to be able to do that. All they're going to be able to do is take it a little easier while still taking care of their family, while still getting the work done they have to. Okay? And because of that, it's going to take longer to get better. If it had been a movable sign, a person could make more changes in their lives that could contribute to getting better. But that wasn't the case here. But the prediction is, yes, you're going to get better. The rest is going to help. Okay? And that they need to replenish themselves and boost, work on bolstering their immune system, do the separating yoga of the moon and Saturn, showing their first line of their body's immunity and resistance has been crossed. And of course, when that happens, you get stressed so much more easily, which is what they felt contributed to the tumor in the first place. And that likely it'll return at some point. That even though they're going to get better from the rest, at some point with Jupiter retrograde, there'll be another episode of a seizure. Okay? So that's our general analysis. Now we also want to check if the Lagna Lord and the Moon is an Ithisala with gentle planets. Okay? The Lagna Lord, which is Mars, is not an Ithisala to anything. Okay? The Moon is in Ithisala Yoga to Jupiter. a benefic. And they're only not even 1 degree apart. So that means it's in Purna Ittasala Yoga. It's happening right now, which means right now they're getting better and they don't need to worry about having another seizure. Okay? When that's what happened. They got better right away. They didn't have any seizures. However, at some point, they're going to have another seizure. And I don't have documentation of that having happened because I moved away from that area and never worked with this person again after this first initial thing. So I lost touch of this person. I don't know if they had a seizure a year later or 6 months later or anything like that. But with Jupiter being retrograde, I would presume that they had some setbacks at some point. But in the immediate future, with the moon being in the full Ittasala Yoga within 1 degree of Jupiter, a benefic, the disease got better, right away. They had that one seizure, they started resting, they took it easy, and they didn't have any other problems within less than a month's time. And all this is going to happen within a month's time because it's a fixed sign. They were back to their normal schedule and normal routine. And the dip from moon to Jupiter is 11 plus 18, 29 minutes of arc, which means 14 and a half days, because there's each minute of arc is half the day, okay? And when it comes to a month, because 1 degree, which is 60 minutes, is a month. So that means 2 minutes is a day. So with 29 minutes, that means 14 and a half days, roughly 2 weeks, and they're going to be feeling a lot better. And that's how it was. In 2 weeks, they're back to working their full-time schedule, back on their feet, back into hustling everything, okay? But because that Jupiter is retrograde, they're going to have to deal with it at some point in the future as well, okay? But the chart's showing a cure. Now, I always like to look at the death due to disease yogas anyway and the other details. It's always good to get a full view of what's going on. But those angles are what's most important. The Lagna Lord's not in the 4th. The 8th Lord in the Lagna indicates death when the Moon or Lagna Lord's in the 8th. Well, here the 8th Lord's in the Lagna, but the Moon or Lagna Lord's not in the 8th. But what was the disease? It was a seizure. And Scorpio, the 8th sign, represents seizures. And that 8th house made him suffer that death, because a seizure is kind of like a momentary death where you pass out, convulse, and your consciousness totally leaves your body. And so it is like a mini death. And so they actually had the mini death experience, okay? Because of this Scorpio and 8th house stuff. If it had just been Scorpio Lagna without Mercury, I don't think there would have been any chance for an actual seizure type thing. Scorpio by itself isn't probably going to do that. But with the 8th Lord there, that contributed to that being the problem. The Lagna Lord with the Sun and the Moon in Ittasala with the 7th Lord. The Lagna Lord Mars is not with the Sun. Is the Moon in Ittasala with the 7th Lord. 7th Lord's Venus. Moon's not in Ittasala Yoga with it. So no worries about that yoga. The 8th Lord in bad dignity, or afflicted or combust at an angle, and in Ittasala with the Lagna Lord indicates death. Okay? While the 8th Lord's in a friend sign, the 8th Lord is combust. See that Mercury seed there? That means it's combust. And let me see if I can get this to work again. That got too small. There we go. Okay. So the 8th Lord's not in bad dignity. He's in a friend sign because Mars is a secret friend to Mercury because he's in the 11th from Mercury. But he is combust in an angle. But he's not in Ittasala with the Lagna Lord. So again, no true death. Again, just that little death. So even the 8th Lord in the Lagna wouldn't necessarily indicate that mini death of the seizure, but it's also combust the Sun. Okay? And it's good it's not in Ittasala Yoga with Mars, because that would have indicated more seizures in the future, more mini deaths. But I wouldn't worry about this person dying simply because there's more benefics on angles than malefics. And that's the basic thing you want to look at. Okay, let's see if there's any planets in war here. So we go to your Shadbala, pull it up, and no planets are in war. Or you can just have the little Shadbala screen. The Shadbala details here, and you can see the Yudabala, the war here, it's all zeros. And sometimes that's good to just keep out for Prashna. So you notice those wars when they're there. Because they are important in Prashna, although they're not often mentioned. Okay. The Lagna Lord in the Dwadasamsha of the Sun indicates death. Well, the Lagna Lord's Mars. Pull up the Dwadasamsha. And it's in Cancer. Or Lagna Lord Mars is in Leo. Okay, indicates death. So a perfect example, like I said, don't predict death when that happens unless there's no cure shown. Here, cure is shown. But isn't it interesting how many death yogas were in this chart? And they had a little death. They had a seizure, which is, almost as close to death as you can have besides getting electrocuted or having a heart attack or something where your heart stops for a few seconds. So it's a kind of little death. Okay, so there's one example. Or actually, I think there's a couple other yogas I want to look at on that one, so let's see. All right. Details of the disease. First, I just want to skip down to this. In respect to whether a person is sick. Sometimes things happen, but are they really, really sick? Or is it just some weird thing? That's not a big deal. The Lagna Lord or Moon in Ithisala with the 6th Lord or combust indicates that the person's sick. Here, the Lagna Lord is the 6th Lord. So yes, the body, that shows the person's body does have some imbalances of sickness. Okay, the body's not healthy. Details of disease. The Lagna and 8th Lords approaching each other. The Lagna and 8th Lords approaching each other indicates death. Okay, Lagna and 8th Lords are not approaching each other, which means they're conjuncting in the same sign with an Ithisala yoga. The Lagna in a movable Rashi, it's not, it's fixed. It indicates that the disease continues to sicken the patient. I already covered that when I said the disease is going to be cured, but it'll take them a while before they're totally well. Now, we've also got the moon in Ithisala to Jupiter, and since that moon was in Purna Ithisala yoga, it still happened in 2 weeks, which was fast. Okay? But let's say that moon had been 5 degrees from Jupiter. Then that fixed Lagna would have shown 5 months to get better. So they were just, again, the fixed Lagna shows the timing pattern is going to be in months, not weeks and not days, as other Lagnas may show. So the fixed Lagna showing months basically means the disease continues to sicken the patient, relevant to that time frame. Luckily, this moon was indicating a time frame of about 1/2 degree, which is 1/2 month. But in most cases, you're going to find the moon is on average going to be about 5 degrees away. So that fixed Lagna on average is going to be about 5 months to get better. It just depends on each chart. So yes, this person took long to get totally better, took longer to get better, because if it had been a fixed Lagna, that would have been better, or a movable sign in half a day. If a dual sign in half a week, 3.5 days. Since it was a month, it took 2 weeks. But in either case, it's very fast because the moon is in Purna Ithisala to Jupiter within 1/2 degree. Okay? But the moon is in Ithisala with a retrograde planet, as mentioned. It's in separating with Saturn, so they need to take the time to really boost their immune system for long term. Okay? If from the 7th day before or until the 4th day after the Prajna, the moon and sun are joined or aspected by Shamyas. Well, we're not going to see that because Saturn has been aspecting the sun for a while now, since the sun's been in Scorpio for 21 days. But the sun's also with Mercury, so that's nice. The moon has the help of Mercury, a benefic, and Jupiter benefic aspecting him for the next couple days. And then he'll go into the 5th where he'll get aspected. And before that he was in the 3rd where he was aspected by those same planets. But there's too many, they're all mixed. Half Saturn, Saturn, Sun, malefics, and then Mercury and Jupiter benefics. But the moon will be going, when it goes into Pisces, it'll get the advantage of being aspected by the Venus, but then it'll also be aspected by another malefic, Mars. So there's going to be like 50-50 yogas of good and bad planets to this point here. So that means they'll get, that yoga is not going to get them better. But we see they're going to get better because the planet's on angles. Okay, so there's one example. So this example is someone who suffered a heart attack. So they had suffered a heart attack, and then they, came to talk to me about it. Let's just start with the angles. There's a malefic in the angle in the first, and that right there is going to show it's going to be harder to cure the disease, to get back to health, due to the person's own behaviors and lifestyles. We can get a clue about what those problems are going to be based on the houses Saturn rules. Saturn rules the 5th and 6th. The 5th house is that they get really excited about things, and as a result, they just do more than they should. The 5th house can get you so inspired and excited about things, and continuing to do that is going to wear their body out, Saturn in the 1st, and not allow them to get the recuperation that they need. The other problem is Saturn also rules the 6th house. It's the other house it rules. And that's a bit of a more important house for Saturn because that's its Mula Trikona house. Saturn rules 2 signs, Capricorn and Aquarius. But Aquarius is its Mula Trikona, so you can emphasize that Mula Trikona house for a planet. And that shows that they're a fighter. They're always struggling against some problem. There's always a problem that they're struggling against. And that creates for a really high-stressed lifestyle. So they're not going to be able to let go of those two things, their excitement and inspiration for things, and their desire to fight and repair and fix every problem that comes their way. And as a result, there'll be a lot of Saturnian stuff on them, which is heaviness and stress. That's going to reduce the chances of them getting better. Okay. Fortunately, to combat that Saturn, we've got Mercury in the 4th as a benefic. Now, Rahu and Ketu, don't count them in most of these Prashna yogas unless it specifically states Rahu or Ketu. If you use Rahu and Ketu when it comes to seeing if a person will be cured from diseases, you're going to predict incorrectly that more diseases will not be cured. So we're not going to worry about the Rahu and Ketu. Okay? Mercury's down in the 4th house, and as far as helping with the disease. So what this person decided to do for the remedy is going to be effective because Mercury's in the 4th house. Okay? Now let's jump to the disease real quick. The disease is the 7th house. It's empty. But the 7th Lord's in the 6th, which you'll remember is not a nice indication. 7th Lord in the 6th is not a nice thing. And it shows that the problem that contributes to the disease is likely to be more chronic and more of a problem and more possibly threatening to their well-being, because the 7th Lord in the 6th gives the disease a lot of energy to grow, basically, is how you want to look at it. Okay, but then there's no planets in the 7th itself, but we can see with the 7th Lord in the 6th that the disease's inclination is going to be to grow. Then we've got one benefic Mercury and one malefic Saturn in an angle. So it's 50-50 so far if they're going to be able to get better. Okay? The 10th has nothing in it but Ketu. And the 4th and 10th lords, the Lagna and 10th lords, are in the 4th. Okay? And that shows that the person and the doctors are going to come up with a remedy that's going to work. So the doctor is going to be able to come up with a useful remedy because Mercury is the benefic and it's the doctor, the 10th. Mercury is the person and it's in the 4th. So the person too. So that's a good placement for that Mercury. The disease is going to be tough to cure though because of Saturn in the 1st and because 7th Lord is in the 6th. So that's what we know so far. The Lagna Lord and the Moon in Ithisala with Samya Grahas indicate overcoming the disease. Well, the Lagna Lord Moon is in Ithisala Yoga to Jupiter. And it's 8 degrees apart, which means in about 8 weeks, because Virgo is a dual sign, and dual signs represent weeks, there could be an improvement in the disease. Okay? So that's one possibility. The Lagna Lord, the moon is not Nithasala Yoga to any other planets, which is good that the moon's not Nithasala Yoga to any malefics, because that will do the opposite. That'll make you struggle with the disease more, right? Okay. Then the Lagna Lord Mercury is not an Ithasala Yoga to anything. In fact, the Lagna Lord is in separating to Saturn. Okay, if I remember right. Let me double check in that. Separating Mercury. Actually, it looks like Mercury is out of orb with Saturn, so it's not quite separating. Okay, Mercury's out of orb. But the Lagna Lord's not applying or separating to anything. So that's good, because applying to troublesome planets could be the disease getting worse. Applying to good planets, though, is what we want, and that's the disease getting better. We don't see that. But we do see it with the moon. So now the moon turns the tides in their favor of getting better, because first we were 50-50, one malefic and one benefic Mercury. But now we turn the tides in their favor thanks to the moon in Ithasala Yoga to a benefic. In about 8 weeks, things starting to get better. Okay, they had a minor heart attack, and as a result, they had heart palpitations and irregular heartbeat and weak heart signals, and that was what was freaking them out. Okay, let's see if they're going to die. The Lagna Lord in the 4th in Ithasala to the moon indicates death. Well, the moon is not applying to Mercury. Okay, so it's not an Ithasala Yoga to that Lagna Lord in the 4th. The 8th Lord's not in the Lagna. The Lagna Lord's not with the Sun. The moon's in Ithasala Yoga with the 7th Lord, which is in the 6th, though. So the same yoga of the moon being aspecting a benefic that helps them get better is half a yoga to them dying. Okay? So again, that shows there could be some more severe problems coming up before they get on top of their disease. Okay? Which is what happened. Because we kind of have the moon, this is a double yoga here. The 8th Lord, which is Mars, in bad dignity, it's in Cancer, debilitated. It's otherwise not afflicted. In fact, it's aspected by just one planet, a benefic Venus. It's not combust, and it's not in an angle. And it's not in Ithasala with the Lagna Lord. So they don't have that. So they're not going to die from that Mars, from that 8th Lord. The 8th Lord instead at least has an aspect of Venus to it to help them stay together and combat that debilitated Mars. Okay? There's no planetary wars, so we can ignore those planetary war ones. The Lagna Lord, which is Mercury, is in the Dwadasamsha of the Sun, of Leo. No, Mercury's in Libra. Okay? Dwadasamsha of Venus, so that yoga is not present. Let's see if we can figure anything else. The Lagna and 8th Lords approaching each other, they're not. The Lagna in a dual Rashi indicates that the disease is other than thought. Okay. So that means the underlying reason they're having these irregular heartbeat, that they passed out from it and had what appeared to be a minor heart attack, isn't really accurate. There's something else going on here. And what they thought was bothering was different. And what it turned out to be, there was actually nothing, when they finally got all their tests done, there was actually nothing wrong with their heart. They exercise regularly. Yeah, they were old, but they exercise regularly. They're extremely fit for their age. In their 70s without any gray hair. A person who can easily walk 10 miles at any time they want. So a healthy, elderly person. So you expect from all that the heart would be pretty solid. So, and as it turned out, the doctors were never able to figure out why their body reacted so strangely and why their heart freaked out on them and was so irregular and passed out. But all the tests showed that the heart was solid, that the organ of the heart was solid. They didn't have cholesterol buildup. They didn't have any of those things that would indicate tendency towards heart diseases and heart attacks, or even strokes, okay? And that's what's really interesting about this Prashna. That dual sign really shows that promise. Now, Mercury, the Lagna Lord, is also with Rahu, and Rahu always confuses things. So this means the state of their body is sort of more mysterious and more hidden and more confused. The doctors can't diagnose this. Anytime you get Rahu involved, the doctors are going to have a harder time figuring out what's really going on, as was the case. But fortunately, the doctor, were able to come up with something to do, a remedy, fourth house remedy, that was going to help anyway. Okay? And so they were going to get better thanks to that Mercury. The moon in Ithisala with Saturn, it's not in Ithisala or separating. If from the 7th day before or until the 4th day after the Prashna, the moon and sun are joined or aspected by gentle planets, conditions can become better. Well, in a couple days later, moon's going to be with Saturn. A couple days before, moon was with Mars. Not very helpful. Okay? Right now, moon's luckily is aspected by Jupiter. But just a day before, moon was with Mars, aspected by Venus, which is good, but then hurt by Mars. A couple days later, the moon's going to be with Saturn, a malefic, but helped by Mercury, and Venus, but then hurt by Sun. So the next couple, that'll take about 4 days for the moon to get there. The Sun, over the next 4 days, is going to continue to be with Venus, but aspected by Mars. So there's not a lot of good stuff on the Sun and Moon. In fact, they're going to continue to become really concerned after the Prashna, because the next few days, Moon is going to be conjunct with Saturn. And that's only going to put more weight on diseases on this earth. And that happened. Their irregular heart rates became more and more fearful to them a few days after the Prashna. Okay, and 2 months later, or sorry, not months, 2 months, 8 weeks is the number I want to use. A little over 8 weeks, because it's 4 degrees moon to a 1244 Jupiter. That's about 8.5 degrees. So 8.5 weeks later, the moon applying to Jupiter is indicating a cure. Time's the time when they get better, and they start improving, and their palpitations, or their irregularities of the heartbeat, the weakness upon standing, the faintness upon standing, all that which caused them to pass out the first time went away. But they never did find out exactly what the problem was, what was actually wrong with them. With Mercury down here being the remedy, one of the main emphases they took was to eat a more rounded diet, to get more balance into their diet, so that if there was any electrolytes or minerals or something that they were missing, to help them reestablish just a more solid foundation for health. And then they got better. So this was a situation that looked very, very scary, very, very threatening, because when somebody passes out from some issue with the heart at that age, it's a life-threatening possibility. But here, luckily, the Prashna effects are pretty nice. Okay, they're better than their worst, thanks to this moon. Now, always look at this last one. How sick are they? Look at the Lagna Lord and the moon in respect to the 6th Lord and other 6th house things. How diseased are their body? The 7th house is the disease, okay, that they're struggling with right now. But you want to look at the 6th house just to see the general health of their body. Is their body sick, meaning it's unbalanced and ready for some symptom to show up? That's what the 6th house is. Or is their body solid and symptoms aren't just going to be popping up because something's always going wrong with it? So is their body in a disease-ripe state? You look at by looking at the 6th. And here, the 6th Lord is in the Lagna, which is half a yes, but the Lagna Lord does not aspect the 6th. Not with Tajika anyway. So that's half a yes, so we don't have to consider that as a full yes. But it does show their body is in somewhat of a disease-ready state due to the 6th Lord being in the Lagna. Okay? So that means we need to really encourage that person to get their body, help their body become more free from a disease state. And a disease state, again, is a state of bodily imbalances that's just waiting for something to go wrong. Okay? Okay, and they're going to have a very hard time getting into that disease-free state because of Saturn in the first house. Okay? So while they're able to overcome the symptoms of this disease, which they did, thanks to this moon, did they ever get to a disease-free state? No, not really, because there's the malefic in the angle, Saturn in the first, and only one benefic in angle. So that's not enough to get them into a completely disease-prone state. So that means their body is just waiting for the next dose of severe stress to come along that takes them out. Okay? But it's not going to happen in the next year because there's nothing here to indicate more problems within the year or death within the year or anything like that. But eventually, yes, it will. Okay? All right, I have several more medical examples. I'll do one or two more videos on medical because it's a very, very helpful part of Prashna. One of my favorite things to do Prashna with. I even have some pet Prashnas when pets get diseased. So we'll deal with all those in the next few days, and I'll have those videos available soon too. Thank you.